So seeing as I'm currently out in Spain filming a thinking tackle and I've been using a boat all week, it seems an ideal time to talk to you about what kind of setup I use when I'm boat fishing and how it differs to what I use when I'm back home in England. Firstly, braided mainline is a must. You know, generally when you're fishing with a boat, you're going to be towing them long range, and if braid is allowed, it offers much better bite indication. Usually I'll use the sub braid. It's something I've used a lot back home in England, something I've got a lot of confidence in using, and when I can get away with it, that will be my go-to. But in this instance, we've had a lot of trouble with underwater snags. This lake is littered with tree stumps. It's a flooded valley, so there's a few old trees left on the lake bed, and I've been boating out there long range, and with a sub braid, it's been sinking to the bottom, and a couple of times I've actually had it snagged up in these old trees and I've had to go out and retrieve the rig. So after a few days, I actually switched over to the Apex. Now the Apex braid is a neutral buoyancy braid. It doesn't float and it doesn't sink. So what that actually means is where I'm boating across the lake to the far margin here into around about 2 meters of water, it's actually sitting mid-water rather than sinking down to the bottom amongst those snags. And since switching to the Apex, I've not had an issue at all with getting snagged up on the retrieve. Now to the end of that braid, I like to tie a 6 foot length of lead core. Now that seems a little bit long, and it's a little bit longer than what I'd usually use when casting. Obviously trying to cast a 6 foot length of lead core is not ideal, but when going out there with a boat, it doesn't matter. And as I'm tying it directly to the end of the braid, I like to have a long length of lead core just to ensure that that last bit is pinned down to the bottom. And obviously the last thing you want is the fish's flanks rubbing against that braid during the fight. I also use a lead clip setup. Now again, back home in England, I tend to favour a helicopter just because I'm casting most of the time, whereas with a boat, it doesn't matter. You know, I'm hand placing it, I can see that rig go down, there's very little chance of tangles, and a lead clip is just perfect for that situation. Attached to that lead clip, I've got an 8-ounce lead, which may seem a little bit heavy, and it's a lot heavier than what I generally use back home in England. But again, we're boating it out there so I can place it, there's no need to cast it. And obviously the advantage of using a real big lead is that when you're bringing it back with a boat, there's no chance of it moving. And if the wind picks up, obviously the undertow can pick up. And the last thing you want is that lead dragging. Now in this instance, I've got spinners on the end. It's spring over here. We're just into March, and I've got spinners with bright pop-ups on, which is obviously a great spring tactic. You can have it whatever rig on the end suits the fishing you're doing. If you take, when we went to Germany in October, for instance, I was boating out little bottom bait tiger nut rigs. Whatever rig suits the situation, I just tie it to the end of that lead clip. Another thing I use when using a boat is a really heavy bobbin. Now this is important to aid bite indication. Obviously if your bobbins are light and you get a drop back and you've got a lot of braid or a lot of line out in the pond, it's likely to not register. So heavy bobbins are a must. And when it comes to bait, in this instance, it's the spring. Now I don't want an awful lot of bait around my rig, and what I've found in the past is if you go out in the boat with big buckets of bait, you tend to grab big handfuls and chuck big handfuls over your rig. So what I've actually been doing here is separating my bait into small buckets, just a little bit of hemp, few boilies, few broken boilies, couple of tiger nuts, just enough to get a bite. I put those in little buckets in the boat, just enough, just what I want to put out there. And then by doing so, you don't overbait the swim. As I say, with big buckets, it's easy to chuck big handfuls in and put too much bait in.